the mirror of the vanishing. The morning the mirror came wrapped in brown paper, Hollow's end felt like it was holding its breath. Evelyn unlocked the house that had belonged to her aunt and found the hallway narrower than in childhood memories, dipped in lemon-scented dust and the distant hush of waves. The mirror leaned against the stair rail, too tall for the landing, an oak frame carved with a pattern like a braided rope. When she glanced up at the glass, her reflection hesitated, as if remembering something else before it remembered her. At first, she blamed fatigue. The mirror's surface was not truly dark, light bent across it like a slow current. Her reflection blinked a fraction too late. When Evelyn set a teacup in front of the glass and stepped back, the teacup in the reflection sat still a heartbeat longer, as though reluctant to follow her motion. The unease was small and domestic, a misbehaving household item. Yet in the days that followed, she noticed other, smaller insistences. A mug gone from the glass, but waiting on the table, tiny differences that might have been imagination or memory making excuses. People in Hollow's End were polite about inherited things and evasive about time. At the market, a woman who sold preserves lowered her voice when Evelyn mentioned the mirror. "My sister's dog used to vanish from reflections," she said, eyes darting, as if apologizing for a story no one wanted to own. Evelyn laughed then, an embarrassed, deflecting sound, and promised she would be careful. Returning home, she found a small photograph on the mantel she didn't recall moving. 3 figures, 2 faces smiling, one face smudged away as if someone had decided it no longer belonged there. Marcus arrived that evening with a duffel bag and a camera that whirred softly when he set it on the floor. He was practical, the kind of friend who fixed household problems or laughed them off. "Old glass plays tricks," he said, but when they stood side by side, the mirror told a different story. Marcus's reflection leaned forward more than he did, head tilted with a companionable smile Evelyn wasn't sure she recognized. When she pointed it out, he frowned at the glass the way one studies a friend with a sudden secret, then teased her to sleep with an ease that could be bought only by not admitting fear. Over dinner, the house seemed to listen. They laughed at small stories, then fell silent because nothing filled the pauses properly. Evelyn woke at midnight to the sensation of being watched and found Marcus asleep, his face peaceful. In the mirror across the room, his reflection sat upright, eyes open and scanning the ceiling as if searching wallpaper for a map. The next morning, the photograph on the mantel had changed again, the center face not only smudged, but slightly lighter, like someone had scrubbed at memory with a wet cloth. Marcus joked about bad film. He also checked his camera with attention Evelyn hadn't seen in him before. Small vanishings accumulated like unpaid bills. A neighbor's cat stopped appearing in shop windows' reflections, though its collar lay on the pavement. A postcard's image looked intact until someone held it to a pane of glass, and the central figure fell away. Evelyn began to test things. She photographed her own reflection and found that Marcus appeared in the picture where he hadn't been in the room, smiling at something behind her shoulder. The camera's negatives showed nothing of a hand that had once rested on a banister. Reality, it seemed, had places where it was porous and places where it closed like a healed wound. Marcus laughed at first, too loud to be comfortable, but stopped smiling when he couldn't find a friend in a picture he had taken that morning. Where his shutter had clicked there was only empty air framed by the door jamb. He searched drawers and pockets as if he could produce himself like a misplaced glove. By the third day, he began to ask the question aloud in a way that made it a possibility rather than a worry. What else can it do? He asked, and the house answered by making his name less likely to be remembered by people who had known him forever, as if townsfolk's voices were being politely edited. When Marcus's memory of Sunday blurred for two people who remembered it cleanly, the town began to tilt towards superstition. Neighbors who had liked Marcus briefly hesitated when his name came up, offering Marcus, oh Marcus, as if the word had caught on their tongue. Evelyn found herself cataloging absences like a careful archivist. Which frames on the wall retained faces, which books lost titles in reflections, which people returned whole when spoken about, and which came back described in uses rather than presents. The mirror had become an inventory she didn't want to complete. Sleep became a currency. Evelyn spent poorly. She dreamt of standing on the shoreline as faces rose from the sea and walked backwards into glass. One afternoon, she dragged the mirror into sunlight and photographed it, hoping that light might flatten its mischief. The negatives were blank, where the mirror should have contained any reflection. The glass swallowed the light like a whole. On the mantel, the faded photograph now had only two clear faces, both looking at the camera, and a white oval where the middle figure might have been. Marcus did not visit that day, and he stopped answering his phone. When she finally confronted the glass alone, Evelyn noticed something travel along its surface like ink. Marcus's reflection was there but thinner, and when she reached out a finger, it trembled inside the mirror and left no mark on the other side. "Come out," she whispered before she could stop herself, and the voice that answered was her own, scraped and slightly delayed. For a moment, she imagined the possibility of bargaining. Words swapped for a smile, presents traded like coins. But the reflection only offered a slow, patient shaking of its head that belonged to a person not sure she had the right to make decisions for someone else. She covered the mirror for a night with an old sheet white against the dark hallway like a promise, and felt some small relief in the weight of fabric between her and whatever unpinned people from their places. The next morning, the sheet lay in a neat fold on the floor, and the glass showed a room that had never known Marcus. A chair where he used to sit was empty, and the photograph had been rearranged to hide the absence. When she mentioned his name to the butcher downstairs, he blinked and answered with a full sentence about a repair Marcus had done last week, then paused, as if searching for warmth to add. Memory here was elastic. That made guilt as easy as forgetting. There was a finalness to the way townsfolk stopped looking for him. Missing persons posters folded into themselves as if resigned, and conversations that once required every name now went on, as if a syllable had been edited out of a familiar song. Evelyn sat in the parlor, clutching the photograph, and noticed that her own reflection in a spoon opposite the mantel had a hairline of transparency at the ear. She stood in front of the mirror one last time with the photograph in her hand and thought about the weight of a life you could no longer prove to someone who had already warmed to the idea of absence. On the day she moved the mirror to the attic, Evelyn considered smashing it. She couldn't be sure whether shattering would free the people within or scatter them into pieces no one could gather. Instead, she slid the glass face down under old linens, where it was both present and denied. Like a secret, the town finally tucked into a drawer. Months later, she left the house for good. The dust lay undisturbed, the photograph tucked into a book. On the train, she pulled out her camera and discovered a negative where Marcus smiled from a seat beside her. Only when she developed it, the image never fully formed. Somewhere between light and paper, he was becoming less possible. The last image is small and almost polite. A thrift shop window months later, a new sign, and the mirror standing upright again amid mismatched chairs and crystal lamps. A patron in a heavy coat pauses, studies the glass, and for a beat the world feels like the moment before a decision. Then he walks away, distracted by something else. The glass changes with a patience only time can afford, sometimes returning a face, sometimes erasing it entirely. Evelyn keeps her photographs in a drawer and counts names like rosary beads. She cannot know if she saved him or if she locked him deeper when she hid the mirror. The town keeps breathing, and the glass keeps learning how to be polite.